If you didn't catch yesterday's, they're recording it. So we looked at, most importantly and critically, foundationally, the reliability of the Bible in our Standing Firm seminar. So let's actually look back. We looked at the reliability of the Bible. We looked at worldview confusion. So those two are all on video. Check those out. Because if we don't have a right understanding of the Word of God, then everything else is going to be confusion, whether it's our own worldview, like we talked about how important a worldview is, historical revisionism, and then today we'll do science and Christianity, sexuality, discipleship, but today we're only going to focus on science and Christianity. And then most importantly, God, once you commit your life to Jesus, He has given you, uniquely gifted you, uniquely placed you in the world to be His hands and feet. And so all He wants us to do is answer His call on our lives and say, "Here am I, send me." So we'll talk more about that at 10:30. But let's jump in here to science and Christianity. So my wife helped me write this section, and she's the scientist. I'm just an economics major from UC Berkeley and whatever. I'm not a scientist, but my wife got a PhD from Stanford in environmental microbiology. So she's like a crazy brainiac. It's like one time when we just gotten married, she was working on her final dissertation, and she says, "Hey, honey, I just published a paper." And like I'm a UC Berkeley grad. I can understand, like general summaries and things. I'm all, "Oh, let me read it." So she hands me, the paper, and I'm just reading the summary section. And literally there's like words that were like a whole sentence long and all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah. And I finally just look and I go, "Wow, honey, great job." And she kind of smirked and said, "Thanks." But basically what she done, if you've ever seen the movie Erin Brockovich, has anybody seen that movie? So that's what Sarah did. She was a scientist version of that. So hexavalent chromium, ooh, big word, toxic chromium in the groundwater. It's horrible. It causes cancer. It's really bad. And there were companies that were dumping that into these ponds and things, and it was getting into the groundwater. Well, she, in her dissertation, said, "How can I help come up with a bacterium, just a single-celled little bacterium that you can put into the groundwater that will convert hexavalent chromium into trivalent chromium, which is actually a mineral in supplements. Our body needs trivalent chromium, to survive." So she was crazy brainiac. She would come up with these bacterium in the lab, and then put them into the groundwater. So it was called bioremediation of water. So it's pretty wild. Anyways, she helped come up with this section on science and Christianity. And one of her favorite passages was Psalm 8, "When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him? The Son of Man, that you care for him." And when we look out at creation, we talked about this yesterday in worldview confusion. This is called general revelation. When you look at, say, this nebula, does anybody know the name of this nebula? This is in the scientific community. This is the Eye of God Nebula. It's literally called that. Isn't that cool? So there's some just amazing things when you study astronomy, when you look at macroscopic, when you look at the whole universe. Psalm 19, "The heavens declare the glory of the Lord. The skies proclaim the works of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they display knowledge." And then Romans 1 is also that concept. So whether you look through a telescope, you're seeing God's amazing handiwork, or you look through a microscope, you're seeing his creation and his amazing handiwork. So She says this, many people in our culture believe that you can't be a scientist and a Christian. And so her point is, that's silly. There's been increasing attacks, especially in the scientific community, against Christians, saying, well, the scientific community has proven naturalistic Darwinian evolution, so you can't be a real scientist and a real Christian, right? Well, that's a lie. And so one of the things we're going to look into that. And then many vocal atheists belittle anyone who does not believe in Darwinian evolution. So I want to go back and look at the history of this conflict between science and evangelical, Bible-believing Christianity. And if you look at anyone coming up with that thesis, that kind of point that, you can't be a Bible-believing Christian and a sincere scientist, they're going to go back to these two books. There were two books written. John Draper, 1874, wrote a book called The History of the Conflict Between Religion and Science. Andrew White was president of Cornell College. 1896, he wrote A History of Warfare of Science with Theology in Christendom. These are the first two books in the history of scientific development and knowledge, where they say and purport to believe that there's always been a conflict between Christianity and science. This is not true. If you go back and talk to scientists in the 1800s, they would say, oh no, studying science just shows God's handiwork, in the world. And so they came up with these two books and this supposed, thing, this myth about the conflict. Well, here's current scientists. This is of secular universities. Professor David Lindbergh, he's the history of science is his field of study. Ronald Numbers, professor, history of science and medicine at the University of Wisconsin. They write, despite a developing consensus among scholars that science and Christianity have not been at war, the notion of conflict has refused to die. So these are actual professors in the field of history of science. And they're saying, of course there hasn't been conflict between actual science and Bible-believing, Christianity, between full Christianity. So, but yet they say this notion has refused to die. Why do they say that? Because it's a convenient narrative if you're anti-Christian. If you want to get out there that, I don't like Christianity, and so we're going to get into this anti-Christian narrative. Look at this. Almost every single field of science has been founded by a Bible-believing Christian. Okay, now, what do we call Bible-believing? But at least people who claimed to have, some of these were very solid Christians, others were not, but they were all Christian. Sir Francis Bacon. So the actual scientific method that we have today, where the scientists say, you can't have any divine intervention in the scientific method today, Sir Francis Bacon would have said, hogwash, of course you can. God can come in and do whatever he wants in supernaturally in his creation. It's his creation. He can do whatever he wants in it. So of course there can be supernatural explanations, even within the scientific method. Kepler, right? Galilei, Descartes, Newton, Boyle, Faraday, Mendel, Calvin, Planck. Do any of those names ring a bell? If you've ever taken a science course, they should ring a bell, right? Physics, genetics, chemistry, quantum theory, quantum chemistry. I mean, you look through they were all founded by Christians. Many of them Bible-believing evangelical Christians. And even like Galileo, Galileo, wasn't he got into a war with the Pope? Well, it didn't have to do with science. Galileo said the Bible cannot err. There's no error in the Bible. Newton, the most beautiful system of the sun, planets, comets, could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being, everlasting, powerful God. So, That's an important point as we get into this. So here's the heart of the debate. My wife says, look, the topic of science and Christianity can be complex, but it's worth understanding some of the key topics. One is, let's talk about intelligent design. This is like a very misunderstood concept. And then many vocal atheists, really attack any things, or they ignore flaws in Darwinian evolution. So let's look at this. This is evolution, biological evolution, what they believe on the left, and this is intelligent design, what it says on the right. So first, biological evolution is simply this: life arose randomly and began as a single bacterium. Through mutation and natural selection, the bacterium evolved through transitional species into humans, right? I think I said that yesterday, right? From the goo to the zoo to you. This is literally, if you want to sum it up, it really sums it up really well. What's the goo? A primordial soup is what they would say. Earth, 4.7 billion years ago, the Earth had a primordial soup on it, and all of a sudden life just appeared, and we'll talk about how likely that is in just a minute. And then through the zoo, all the different species we have over the billions of years that they would purport we've been here, you end up with humans. Intelligent design is you have people say, oh, intelligent design means you're going to teach young earth creationism in the schools. Well, no, intelligent design is this theory. The complexity of life systems shows evidence of a designer. That's all intelligent design is about. It has nothing to do about who God is and the details of creation and all of those things. It simply is saying that Darwinian evolution is a failed theory, and we're going to show you the evidence for that this morning, and that intelligent design is a simple theory, but it's much more accurate. It's that the complexity of life systems shows evidence for a designer, not that they just popped into existence from nothing. That takes blind faith to believe in that, and we're going to look into that right now. But watch the religion of Darwinian evolution. So, by the way, I've got a couple handouts. This double-sided sheet is called The Religion of Darwinian Evolution. It's a double-sided sheet. It's on the back table back there. So it has all the quotes I'm going to give you, or most of them, are on this sheet. So quick reference sheet. And then yesterday, the reliability of the Bible. This is a really important one. As I said, if you get the Bible right, then everything else will fall in line. So grab those sheets back there if you want those. Excuse me. So let's look at this kind of evolution is more than mere science. Watch this. Michael Ruse. Now, by the way, I'm only going to quote to you Darwinian evolutionists. And I'm only going to give quotes of the highest level. We're talking professors, the ones who write the textbooks that are used in our universities, in our school system. Okay, I'm only going to quote to you the highest level Darwinian evolutionists who are brilliant in their field, like Michael Ruse, wrote a book, Saving Darwinism from the Darwinians. He says, evolution is promulgated as an ideology, a secular religion, a full-fledged alternative to Christianity with meaning and morality. Evolution is a religion. This was true of evolution in the beginning, and it's still true of evolution today. That's from an evolutionist. So you need to see that even the highest level Darwinian evolutionists understand that this is a religious worldview. A lot of them will claim, no, we just follow the facts. We just go where the data goes. Well, that's not true, and they're fully admitting it here. So that's one. Let's look at this. We're going to look at three things this morning that will almost never be brought up in the public school system. And when you go to the Museum of Natural History, these will almost never be talked about. The problems of the progenote theory. Oops, my wife uses a big word, progenote. What's progenote? Pro is first, genote is living organism. What's the theory of the first living organism? There's a huge problem there. What you're going to find out is It is impossible for life to come from non-life. That takes a miraculous move of God. There's no other explanation for it. We're going to look at that. We're looking at lack of transitional species. We're going to look at irreducible complexities. And flaws in Darwin's theory of evolution are rarely even hinted at in our culture today. And that's a huge mistake. Because what look, science is simply studying the stuff, right, in the cosmos through a telescope or a microscope. You study things and learn from that. So that's all science is. And as we know as Christians, that shows God's handiwork. That's kind of cool. But you have a lot, increasingly huge numbers of scientists who are very hostile towards Christianity. So let's look at this problems in the progenote theory. What is this theory saying? They're saying your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was a single-celled bacterium. It's literally what they're saying. So this single-celled bacterium, they say, is a progenote. And they say it came from a primordial soup. This is in the Stanford PhD level Brock Biology of Microorganisms in my wife's book. It said, what was the first self-replicating organism like? This question is impossible to answer. And then it goes on to use the most unscientific language possible. It says this: one could easily imagine that there was a primordial soup with methane gases and water and lightning, and all of a sudden lightning struck and all of the chemical elements to form this single-celled bacterium just by random chance all came together in the perfect circumstance, and poof, it started to self-replicate. They literally say this in PhD level textbooks. And I'm reading this, and Sarah's like, yeah, everybody was kind of like, well, that's not very scientific, as you're reading through this stuff, right? So it's impossible to answer this. Now, it's very interesting. Sir Frederick Hoyle was a mathematician and a statistician, and he was getting really annoyed by the debate in the 70s and 80s between Christian scientists and secular scientists. Secular scientists say, oh, it's all happened by chance. And the Christians are like, no, it's impossible that it happened by chance. So Sir Frederick Hoyle calculated statistically the likelihood or possibility that life, even the most simple single-celled bacterium, could have popped into existence from non-life. And so this is back in Sir Frederick Hoyle's day, back in the 80s. He said the likelihood of the formation of life from inanimate matter, that's life from non-life, is 1 to a number with 40,000 zeros after it. It is enough to bury Darwin and the whole theory of evolution. What? He goes on to say the scientific community has been bamboozled into believing that evolution has been proved. Nothing could be further from the truth. And he's an evolutionist. So do you know how he thinks life got here? He doesn't believe in God. So how does he think life got here? It's a theory called panspermia, which means an alien life form came and planted that single-celled bacteria on primordial planet Earth 4.7 billion years ago, and then it multiplied and evolved to what we have today. And that's the common theory, actually. They don't talk about that much because it's a joke. Like you guys, a lot of you laughed about it, right? So that's like, ooh, zip it. Don't talk about panspermia because that's that sounds silly. Well, it is silly because all it does is push it out. Okay, where did the alien life form? How did that alien life form pop into existence somewhere out in the universe? That's not logical, right? That's illogical. But they know they have a failed theory, and so they got to come up with reasons for how it got here. Look at George Wald, again, PhD, writes the textbooks, he wrote in The Origin of Life. Most modern biologists have reviewed with satisfaction the downfall of the spontaneous generation hypothesis. So what's the spontaneous generation hypothesis? The progenial theory, how life came from non-life. The downfall of that hypothesis, yet unwilling to accept the alternative belief in what? Special creation. That's what we believe, right? Are left with nothing. Watch where he goes. I think a scientist has no choice but to approach the origin of life through a hypothesis of spontaneous generation. What did he just do? Have you guys been like in junior high school, and some math kid is talking with some bully, and the math kid is winning a logical argument? What does the bully do? Starts like yelling at him or whatever, going, "You're an idiot," and starts like, he's like, "Are you kidding me? This is like childish," and yet this is the truth, the unspoken truth within the highest level Darwinian evolutionists, because they know that their theory is failed. They know it is impossible statistically that life could have come from non-life. And so they're frustrated, and so they think, well, I just have to stick with it. You just got to keep saying it. It's like, that's not scientific. Do you see this? This is not science. That's blind faith in Darwinian evolution and in naturalistic, that there can be no God. All right, that's the progenial theory. Let's look at problems of transitional species. Now, what is this? This is, let me just read what Darwin said, and then I'm going to just break it down in super simple terms. Darwin said, this is Darwin himself, in his book. Now, nobody tells you the whole title of Darwin's book. Darwin's book is On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. That was just part of the title, and the title of his book goes on. Or The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life, Charles Darwin, 1882. Charles Darwin was a flaming racist. Charles Darwin thought that white people were more evolved than black people or Chinese people. And he wrote this book. That was one of his premises, is that there are people who are more evolved here than others. Where did Hitler get his idea for the final solution? Darwin. This is the source. Why did Margaret Sanger start Planned Parenthood? This reason. Go read the writings of Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood. Why are there Planned Parenthoods in mostly minority neighborhoods across the United States? Margaret Sanger was a flaming racist. She thought that blacks and Chinese were like weeds and should be exterminated, literally. And she's the founder of Planned Parenthood. We need to abort all babies coming from minority races. Where does this worldview come from? Charles Darwin. Well, it comes from Satan. but Darwin is the one who made this famous. This is really important you guys get this. This is where some of this horrible racism got infused into our society today. Now, he says this in his book, Origin of Species. But that's not the whole title, remember. So must the number of intermediate varieties, those are transitional species, which have formerly existed, be truly enormous. Why then is not every geological formation from every stratum full of such intermediate links? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain, and this perhaps is the most obvious and serious objection which can be urged against my theory. What's he saying? In Darwin's day in the 1800s, when you dug down into the geological record, when you dug into the earth, you were digging up fossils, he said, what I'm finding are fully formed life forms. I'm not seeing all these transitional species. What he's saying is this is a massive problem for my theory. So what he's saying is, I'm going to break it down into a very simple thing. You have a hippo and you have a whale. What in Darwin's theory is, this Hippo, which lives on land and water, evolved over millions of years to a whale. And so he says what you should be seeing are a hippo. A hippo's legs getting shorter and shorter and shorter, and the hippo's snout moving back further, further, further. And then you see this more whale-like creature start to develop with, shorter and shorter and shorter legs. That's what they tell you in evolutionary theory. They say, oh, look at whales are mammals, right? Look at whales, and they still have hip bones left. They have vestigial organs, which are supposedly, parts of their body that are useless. We supposedly, our tailbone of humans, is supposedly a vestigial organ, that left over from monkeys, because we evolved supposedly from monkeys. Are you aware if you remove your tailbone, you're sterile? The tailbone is very useful, actually. God designed it. Every part of our body is very useful. There's nothing vestigial. There's nothing useless left over from, some evolutionary thing. God designed us perfectly. So that's what he's talking about, is when you dig into the geological record, he's saying all you see is hippos and whales. We should see thousands of transitional species between those two. But he says, I don't see any. And it's a massive objection to my theory. Okay, well, that was in 1882. We've found millions of fossils now of transitional species, right? Not so much. Stephen Gould, Marxist professor at Harvard, again, highest level. The absence of fossil evidence for intermediary stages has been a persistent and nagging problem for evolution. They're admitting there's no transitional species in the fossil record. Look at David Raup, Field Museum of Natural History. We are now 120, actually more than that now, years after Darwin, and the knowledge of the fossil record has been greatly expanded. We now have 250,000 fossil species, but what happened? The situation hasn't changed much. The record of evolution is still surprisingly jerky, and ironically, we have even fewer examples of evolutionary transition than we had in Darwin's time. What he's saying is we now know what Darwin thought was a transitional species was actually a fully formed life form that has existed for, forever, right? And so they're losing transitional species, not gaining them as we dig into the fossil record more. Do you guys see this? Okay, there's not a document of transitional species, and this is a huge problem for naturalistic Darwinian evolution. All right, and then let's talk about irreducible complexity. So here, let's go back to Origin of Species. Darwin said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would what? Absolutely break down. And yet you're told today, you're an idiot if you don't believe in naturalistic Darwinian evolution. You're a fool. It's really hostile language, and we'll get into that as well. I'll show you some of the hostile language. So what's he saying here in irreducible? This is what he's talking about here is something called irreducible complexity. He's saying, okay, let's talk about the eye. He's talking about we should see a species with a jelly-formed sac. That's not quite an eye yet. But then we see these progression and many successive slight modifications where all of a sudden you have an eye that actually works and you can see. So what is irreducible complexity? Michael Behe wrote a book called Darwin's Black Box. In this book, Behe says, by irreducibly complex, I mean a single system composed of several well-matched interacting parts. So this is a lot of language. I'm going to show you a concrete example, and we'll break it down into super simple terms. But the removal of any one of the parts of the system causes the system to stop functioning. So let's talk about what is an irreducibly complex system. This is called a bacterial flagella. How does the bacterium move around? It has a flagella. It's this little thing that comes out the end. It spins 100,000 revolutions per minute in one direction if it wants to go one direction, and then it can go reverse and spin 100,000 RPMs the other way to move the other way. So this bacterium can actually move through its environment. Well, they now have, through electron microscopes, they've now seen the absolute stunning complexity of a single-celled bacterium, and including the bacterial flagella and how the thing moves around. It's exactly like a rotor and a stator and a hook and all these different pieces of a motor are involved in this tiny single-celled bacterium. What happens if you remove the stator? Will that system work? It fails to work, and the bacterium would die. Or the rotor, or the bearing, or the hook, or the flagellar filament, or the outer membrane. You remove any one of those parts, does it work? No, it fails to work. Same thing like the eye. The eye is incredibly complex. The pupil, the lens, the iris, the lens sac, the optical disc, all of these pieces of the eye. What happens if I remove the optical disc? You're blind. What happens if I remove the iris? What happens if I remove the optical nerve? What happens if I remove the retina? What happens if I remove any piece of this crazy complex system of the eye? You're blind. What Darwin is saying, and what Michael Behe's book is saying in Irreducible Complexity, this system, the eye, for example, is irreducibly complex. Why would you have a fish with some jelly-filled sac on the surface of the skin that has no real purpose? Why would that have a competitive advantage over a fish without that? Or why would the jelly-filled sac have an optical nerve that goes to it? So you can't come. So again, it breaks down. So irreducible complexity is huge evidence against naturalistic Darwinian evolution. Do you guys kind of with me? All right. So, hey, quick story here. Go back to transitional species here for a minute. I hope you get a little bit righteously angry with this, because we're told we're stupid if you don't believe in naturalistic Darwinian evolution, right? Okay, that should make you a little righteously angry. Now, like we talked about yesterday, we need to speak the truth in love and engage people with grace and love. But when I was a teacher, remember, I was not a believer. I was an atheist for the majority of my life. And so let me go back to a day when I was teaching 6th grade, and as an atheist, I believed all this stuff. I believed it was all real. I believed Darwinian evolution was fact. That's what I was taught, so that's what I was teaching to my kids. So I'm in my classroom, 6th graders, got 30 some odd kids. I'm teaching transitional species. I said, look, here it is, right? Lucy, up to Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo sapien, there's your transitional species. So that's Darwinian evolution proven. Oh, look, here's whales. See, look, vestigial organs. Here's the leftover hip bones of whales. Those are vestigial. So it's all proven. This is all just proven fact. And bless his heart, this one little 11-year-old raises his hand. He says, well, Mr. Williams, isn't that just one theory of how we got here? Isn't there another theory like creation? What did I say? I said, no, this is proven fact. Poor little kid, right? Now, after I came to saving knowledge of the truth and repented of all my sins, I tried to actually find the kid. I wanted to reach out to him and say, I'm so sorry, I was totally wrong, because I was really convicted. So I never was able to get a hold of him. What's my point, though? Most people teaching naturalistic Darwinian evolution as fact are not like evil, I just want to capture your kids and get their worldview and make them believe mine. I believed that naturalistic Darwinian evolution was true. What and who are we battling? We talked about this yesterday. I want to reiterate this. What are we battling? Yes, Satan. But yesterday, what did we talk about? Does anyone remember? What are we battling? What are the strongholds that we are demolishing are what? Are we demolishing people? People are our mission field. What are we demolishing? Paul said it. What do we demolish? Arguments and pretensions that set themselves up against the knowledge of God. 2 Corinthians 10, 4 and 5. So we are battling the worldview that people have been deceived by. It's really important that we remember this. I would submit to you 95%, I don't know, I waffle on this. Sometimes I go down to 80%, sometimes I go up to 95%. 90 some odd percent of scientists have just been deceived. They really believe it's proven fact. I would encourage you to give them the document like the reliability of the Bible to show some of these quotes, right? It's not true. So I just want to encourage you that on the big picture there. Let me show you, though, some of this stunning propaganda that's out there. Richard Dawkins, anybody heard of him? Dawkins says it's time to question the abuse of childhood innocence with superstitious ideas of hellfire and damnation. And I want to show how the scriptural roots of the Judeo-Christian moral edifice are cruel and brutish. When it comes to children, I think of religion as a dangerous virus. That's some of the attitude towards us. Okay, it's stunningly hostile. He says, Dawkins goes on another article, it's absolutely safe to say that if you meet somebody who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane, or wicked. But I'd rather not consider that. In his British accent, his very pompous British Oxford accent, he'll tell you that. And it's like, that's stunningly dangerous language. Okay, it yields a stunning hostility towards Central Baptist, towards evangelical Bible-believing Christians. And it's not true. And my point here is Dawkins knows it's not true. So look at this. Richard Dawkins believes in intelligent design. Did you hear what I just said? Watch this interview.
What do you think is the possibility that intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues in genetics or in evolution?
It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility, and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry and molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer.
Wait a second. Richard Dawkins thought intelligent design might be a legitimate pursuit?
And that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe. But that higher intelligence would itself have had to have come about by some explicable or ultimately explicable process. It couldn't have just jumped into existence spontaneously. That's the point.
So Professor Dawkins was not against intelligent design, just certain types of designers, such as God.
Somebody seen that movie? It's a really great movie. So that's Ben Stein. Ben Stein is a secular Jewish person. And he did this movie, Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. And in this movie, he makes the case and says, this is insane. How are we expelling sincere scientists who simply doubt Darwinian evolution? And they say, no, there's got to be other designers, like intelligent design for things. Isn't that fascinating? That's Dawkins, who's crazy hostile, and even he believes, like we talked about, that an alien life form planted a bacterium on Earth, right, to get around his issue. So Look at this. Mark Singham is a professor teaching in propaganda. He says, and I use that trust, the trust with the students, to effectively brainwash them. Our teaching methods are primarily those of propaganda. We appeal without demonstration to evidence that supports our position. We only introduce arguments and evidence that supports the currently accepted theories and omit or gloss over any evidence to the contrary. I'm only quoting you the highest level Darwinian evolutionist professors. That is, now, again, that's a smaller percentage. I'm trying to have grace and trying to look at others more highly than myself. But there are others who have a very hostile belief in this. Douglas Futima, evolutionary biology. He said this, evolution is not a theory, it's a fact. As fully as the fact of the Earth's evolution around the sun, like the heliocentric solar system, evolution began as hypothesis and achieved facthood as the evidence in its favor became so strong that no knowledgeable and unbiased person could deny its reality. Richard Lewontin, evolution is fact, not theory. Birds arose from non-birds and humans from non-humans. No person who pretends to any understanding of the natural world can deny these facts any more than she or he can deny the earth is round, rotates on its axis, and revolves around the sun. You're stupid if you don't believe in naturalistic Darwinian evolution. Do I paraphrase that okay? Right? Now, again, Richard Lewontin is a professor of evolutionary biology. What else does Richard Lewontin believe? Watch what Lewontin wrote. We take the side of science, watch this, in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs. No matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated, that would be you and me he's talking down to, right? Moreover, that materialism is an absolute. What's materialism? That is atheism. Materialism, naturalism means atheism. There is no God, and then atheism is all there is, right? For we cannot allow, read this, a divine foot in the door. Do you see the agenda? Again, I'm only quoting to you the highest level Darwinian evolutionists. They know their theory is bogus, and they want to simply attack intelligent design or Christians or creationism as insane or wicked and all these other things. So, in conclusion, look, you need to, it's good science to look at all the evidence. Otherwise, you're just one-sided. And then an evolution-only curriculum shames children who believe in creation. Look at this. This is Descent from Darwin. There are a growing number of scientists who are saying we are skeptical of claims for the ability of random mutation and natural selection. They're saying Darwinian evolution is bogus. And that list of scientists, here's 5 or 6 of them. Hey, who's that on the bottom? That's my wife. She signed it. This growing list of scientists, we're over 1,000 now, have signed on to this. Okay? There's a growing consensus in the scientific community that Darwinian evolution is bogus, that it does not account for the complexity of life systems. And I hope that's encouraging for you. And grab, the sheet back there, because look, we need to boldly proclaim this, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that mankind is without excuse. Romans 1:20 is very powerful. That's general revelation. And now, remember, what are we doing here? Should we camp out in trying to win an argument? Well, I want to win this argument. That no, I'm a young Earth creationist. I'm going to win this argument. And here's all these crazy Darwinian evolutionists trying to take your kids captive. No, we don't camp out here. Remember, what's the point of apologetics? To represent Jesus well and get it back to the gospel. So always bring it back to who do you think that Jesus is? And what do you think about the Word of God? And get that gospel woven back in, because it's critically important. There's the book back on the back table if you're in the public school system. My wife and I wrote the book, Navigating Public Schools. How do you do that as a believer? Can you do that as a believer? And then the video series on our website. So next session, we're going to get into influencing our culture from Christ and answering God's call on your life. God has called every single one of you. Have you answered that call? We're going to investigate that.